Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the battle group overview of the Guards Armoured, also known as the Household Division. Now this is a division that I feel is more of an armoured support division than particularly like an armoured tank-on-tank engagement division. It doesn't really fare that well against German armour, honestly. I find that it suits the role better versus like infantry divisions, honestly. And I'll explain that as I'm going through my unit choices. So let's start off with the Recon tab. So in this tab, there's two kinds of Recon that we always talk about, and that is the 2-man squads, the 5-man squads, and sometimes there's 9-man squads. But in this case, for the Allied side, we're talking about 2-man concealed squads, which you want to keep in places where they never get found. And I've brought some of these in Humber Mark 3s. These are 1-star recce squads. That's going to give you a 1-star Humber Mark 3 with 230 rate of fire on its 8 HE power main gun, which is actually pretty decent fire support. Pretty expensive vehicle, but I find that I have been using them. In this case, the recce just there to provide you with your recon onto enemy infantry and emplacements for your support units to take them out. That's mainly what the recce are here for. Then I have a squad of scouts, which are basically some recon with staying power, and they're the sort of squads that you would use to advance towards where you think there's enemy infantry, and then if they get engaged, they can basically keep those guys spotted without dying like immediately, like a recce squad would. So it sort of gives you that chance to spot enemy infantry without the risk of them dying instantly. And they also come with a universal carrier, which can be useful in certain situations, but that 4 HE power is nothing to write home about. You can bring in recce in the Willys MMG, and for 30 points that would be a reasonable choice for recon infantry, like instead of, for example, my recce in the Humber Mark 3. But I think the reason I bring in the Humber Mark 3 in this deck as opposed to other decks is because it actually has the experience that other Humber Mark 3s don't. Now you can also get Humber Mark 4s available in this deck, and that is a 7 round per minute 7 AP gun on it with a machine gun. Does have high optics, but not the best unit for 80 points at all, so definitely not something I would recommend bringing in, especially when you think about the Polish deck that can bring in a Stuart for around the same price with recon capability. So yeah, this is overpriced. I think it needs a bit of a price buff in terms of decreasing the price, and that would make it more plausible to bring in, but at the moment not really my choice. My choice, however, in Phase A is the AEC Mark III. This thing is really nice, actually. It's got 8 front armor, 11 AP on the main gun, 5 HE on the main gun, and a machine gun. So not only can this thing do quite a lot of damage to infantry, it can also kill a lot of tanks early on in the game. Like in Phase A, 11 AP power is more than enough to deal with a lot of German armour, and 8 front armours enough to tank a lot of the hits that you're going to be receiving as well. So this can be a force to be reckoned with. You just got to make sure that it's accompanied by some sort of command unit, otherwise you're looking at an unvetted AEC with 5 accuracy, which isn't going to hit particularly often, but when it does, it can do a lot of damage. Moving into Phase B, I actually have another card of these just because I do think they are that good. Just having like a recon vehicle with that much firepower, it's more than a Puma, and that's really saying something. So really, really strong command units or recon units. They do cost 125 points, which is quite a lot to invest, especially early on, so I wouldn't recommend bringing the A Phase 1 at the start of the game, but maybe 5 minutes in or 6 minutes in if you can find a space for it. The AEC can use up some of those points to, to bring in a decent recon vehicle. Even in Phase B, one of these a minute is quite a nice idea because they are very versatile units. Let's move on to infantry. So this is why that I said that this deck can very easily deal with infantry decks, because not only does it have the fire support capabilities, but it also has the infantry availability. So in Phase A, I'm bringing in 3 cards of 6 rifle squads, and they're only 20 points apiece, which easily allows this deck to match up to enemy infantry divisions. Furthermore, you can get a card of 4 Vickers HMGs for 20 points apiece, alongside a rifle leader which comes in a command carrier, and that command carrier upvetted can tear apart enemy infantry squads. So you need the rifle leader in Phase A because it's your command infantry, quite simply. Then the other choices of things in Phase A are just Bren Group. And Bren Group I find just don't have the staying power that rifles do in order to deal with a infantry squad. And in my opinion, why would you bring in the Bren Group over the rifles? Yes, you can get a half track with them, which is tempting, but in my opinion, just having the rifle spam is enough because you have other means of providing fire support than a 30 cal half track. And that's just paying extra points, in my opinion, for something that you're not necessarily needing. So moving into Phase B, I'm going to be bringing in a squad of rifles, even more rifles here, 8 more to bolster our lines and just to occupy buildings that you don't want the enemy to occupy, basically. You can get more Vickers HMGs, but to me, I'd much prefer to have, again, the staying power of 10-man squads. You can bring in Assault Pioneers, and I would if you had more availability. Because Assault Pioneers are the only infantry in this deck that can deal with enemy infantry in forests. But the main issue here is they are 5-man squads, and they cost a lot to come in with the half track, and the half track, again, like I said before, isn't particularly useful. This is quite an interesting choice, actually. The Bren Group with the 1-star veterancy and the M5 half track, that's something you could consider for sure. I wouldn't mind somebody like swapping out the rifles for like Bren Group with half tracks, because those half tracks will be 2-star with command nearby, which is actually quite useful. And the Bren Group, I mean, they can fill buildings that you don't want taken over, and that was pretty much what you'd always use them for. You'd never want to run Bren Group at an enemy infantry squad because you'll lose every time. But in my case, I just prefer having as much availability as possible. The rifle squads, I feel, can hold their own in close combat and at distance. So, yeah, in my opinion, that's the best choice for this deck. And then moving into Phase C, this is one of a few decks that do have Phase C infantry. I'm going to be bringing in some motorized rifles. These guys have a Piat, and that is the main reason that I bring them in. 20-point infantry squad and a 20-point half track. One of the only British units that I know of that has an AT weapon as well as, you know, like rifles and so on, like standard munitions. So yeah, it's good that it has a Piat. The Piat's not the most fantastic AT weapon in the game, let's put it that way, but still a nice versatile unit, and does come with those half tracks that can be useful for punching through a line moving into Phase C. Yes, half tracks can be useful in Phase B, but there we go. I just prefer to have the rifle spam going on, and I find that they're a lot more reliable when taking on enemy infantry. They don't die so quickly compared to Bren Group and Assault Pioneers, which only have 5 strength. Like, the perfect deck in this situation, the perfect infantry tab, would be have an extra card of Assault Pioneers in Phase C and an extra card of Bren Group in the M5 half tracks in Phase B. Those are the only 2 that I would consider taking on top of the rest of the units. You don't need another command infantry squad because you get plenty of other command units in this battle group. So let's move on to the tank tab. Now the tank tab in this deck is pretty damn big. You can bring in an entire 9 packs of tanks, which is a lot. But as you'll see, is I don't actually bring in that many availability of tanks throughout my entire game. So I've got the Command Cromwell in Phase A alongside 2 Cromwells. These are Cromwell 5s. The Cromwell 5s are great because they have 5 HE and they have 2 of these Abissa machine guns, so they are very effective at taking out infantry, just like Stuart 6s are with their 330 cals, except from they're a lot stronger and they have much more AP power for dealing with opposing tanks. Also, they've got 1 more armor than Stuart's, so in my opinion it's much more worth me bringing in the 120 point units if I need them. But the reason that I have the Cromwell 5 and the Cromwell 4, I normally bring in the Cromwell 4, but the Cromwell 5, the main reason I have it is as an alternative to the Cromwell 6s that I have in the support tab. So if I need more like AP power against tanks, then I'll bring these. However, if I need more HE and stuff to deal with infantry, then I'll bring in the Cromwell 6s, which are these chaps with the HE gun on them. But yeah, the Cromwell 4 is pretty much always brought in for its command radius to either support the Cromwell 5s or the Cromwell 6s. In Phase B, I'm going to be bringing in 1 card of the Sherman 5s. These guys have the command ability and they are very nice infantry support vehicles. They have a 230 cals and a 50 cal, as well as 5 HE on their main gun. So they definitely do a lot of damage to infantry, and they are 1 star, so that's very helpful as well. Not really going to face up to heavy German armour in Phase B, so keep them out of line of sight of that and AT guns. But if you can put them in a situation where they're covering your infantry or your recon's discovering infantry and you use these to kill it, it will do a good job. Then in Phase B, I do have 1 Firefly available. And this is pretty much a tank that I would bring in reactionary. I wouldn't bring it in like initially. So this is a tank that I would use to react to heavier armor being brought onto the field in Phase B. If it's something like Stugs, a Firefly can deal with Stugs quite nicely because it has 1,200 meter range. As for Panthers, however, the Firefly can still struggle because the Panther will have enough AP power to penetrate the Firefly quite easily, and they are very expensive, so be careful engaging Panthers with Fireflies. Fireflies can be pretty decent though against Tigers, and they can also be pretty decent against, like I said, Stugs and other lower armoured German targets. Then moving into Phase C, I have some more Sherman 5s for, again, the command radius and just availability, and then some more Fireflies. I bring in the Fireflies that do have the 1-star veterancy because when they're 2-star veterancy, they can be like snipers from the 1,200 meter range, which is kind of what you need them to be in certain situations, especially in tank-on-tank engagements. The Fireflies only survive if they don't get hit. So you just don't want them to get hit in the first place. You keep them at max distance, make sure the enemy's accuracy is as worse as it can be, and you should be all good. And yeah, just got a card of 2 of them without veterancy for extra availability. If we look at other choices, you can bring in Sherman 5s without command, just to get more availability, but these guys don't have any veterancy. You can also get Cromwell 7s, which are Cromwells with extra armor basically, compared to the normal Cromwells, the Cromwell's 4s. So yeah, you can see there the only difference is 4 extra front armor for an extra 20 points. And while the Cromwell 4s, or Cromwell 7s, sorry, are okay, I mean, I would always bring in a Sherman 5 instead of a Cromwell because you have a 50 cal on the Sherman, and that's just so much more useful. So it depends if you want to spam Shermans or not. They're only 150 points each, which is really nice actually. But in general, it's never going to be enough to deal with like super heavy German armor, which is where this deck really falls down. Either way, let's move on to the support tab. and you'll see that first of all I have a card of dingoes. Now since command is pretty short in infantry, I've got dingoes to support infantry moving into the late game really. And I've also got sods to do the same, but I bring in the sods for a different reason. The dingoes, however, yeah, these guys are good for infantry support directly, and that's what I use them for. Moving more into phase B, honestly, I don't tend to bring in the dingoes in phase A because they have the command infantry then, but if the command infantry dies, the dingoes are the replacements. Then I have a card of Bedford Supply, mainly to resupply artillery and also just machine guns in general. I have a card of Cromwell 6s in phase A, and usually I'd bring in both of these. They're 110 points and they have 1200 meter range with 13 HE value, which is actually really good. So most AT guns in phase A are 1000 meter range. If you spot them with a Recon unit, you can just destroy them from out of their range with one of these. Furthermore, these guys are extremely good against infantry, of course, with 2 machine guns and a 13 HE powered gun. Kind of makes sense, right? Really, really nice unit. I would definitely recommend bringing these guys in. Moving into phase B, this is where things get a bit weird. This thing is a sod. And yeah, it's as derpy as it is effective. And the reason I say effective is think King Tiger, think smoked King Tiger, rushed by sods. That's the dream right there, and it's something that I've been trying to make come true for a while now, and it's something that I will persist to try. I really want these things at 40 points apiece to zoom up a road at 95 km/h speed and catch out a King Tiger with one Piet shot, because the Piet shot has penetration at any range basically. So 200 meter range on that. If it fires the Piet and the Piet hits, the Piet kills. So it would kill a King Tiger in one hit, which would be hilarious, and I really want to see it happen. So that's the dream, that's why it's in my deck. Otherwise I don't particularly use it, and I would say replace this sod with something on another tab. But yeah, that's my dream, and that's why it's in the deck. Then I have another card of Cromwell 6s, just because I think they are so effective and so useful for taking out enemy AT emplacements. Allows you to be a lot more maneuverable with your tanks moving into the late game. So bringing in more of these in phase B makes sense to me. I don't bring in crocodiles in phase C, just because by phase C I feel that crocodiles are completely outmatched by anything that the Germans would be bringing in. And they are also too slow and will be picked off by the multiple AT guns that will most likely be on the map by then. So in general, not really something that I think is worth bringing in. So let's move on to the anti-tank tab of this deck. I'm going to be starting off with 2 6-pounder packs in phase A, which gives me 6 6-pounders to work with. It's a bit overkill, honestly, since I do bring in the Cromwells in phase A for the tank tab as well, and will generally use those to take on enemy tanks should I need to. But 6-pounders are generally very useful in a lot of situations. So yeah, having 6 of those in phase A is just really helpful, and they're just way better than Piets. Piet squads are useless in this game. I was saying I'm relying on the dream, which is the sod, but yeah, in general, Piets are unreliable, so it's unlikely for you guys to see me kill a King Tiger with a sod one day, but if I do, trust me, I'll make a video about it. So I guess what you could do, if you feel like you have enough 6-pounders in phase A, you could just swap out one of those for more 17-pounders, or maybe even more Achilles. But yeah, 17-pounders, these are the real deal. 17-pounders in phase B, these guys are what you deal with Panthers and basically anything heavy with. And the reason I say that instead of like an Achilles or even the Fireflies is because 17-pounders are like AT guns, right? They are 6 strength, and they're not like vehicles. So like where a Firefly, if it went up against a Panther or a Tiger, might get one popped by a penetrating shot, a 17 pounder will always take multiple shots to kill by another tank, which makes them a lot better for dealing with tanks than a Firefly, which is kind of what makes this deck a bit odd, because it's a tank deck, right? It's an armoured deck, but it doesn't actually use its armour to counter armour, at least not heavy armour, and it relies very much on these 17 pounders. So I think actually having 3 cards of them is ideal, because you'll be using them a lot throughout the game. And in this case, actually, I'm just going to use the ones with Bedford trucks, because I think that bringing in the ones with half tracks for an extra 20 points is just a waste of points, when 120 is like one a minute in Phase B, which is actually quite nice for if you're dealing with a lot of heavy armor coming your way. And it's a very cheap way to deal with Panthers, for example, because a Panther might be worth 260, 280 points, and you bring in a 17 pounder and you pop one, well, you've paid off your 17 pounder nearly twice over already. So you got to think of it that way. Then I do have 1 card of Achilles, although I don't actually use them too much. The main reason I have them is to sort of deal with medium armor again. These are fantastic counters for Stugs, because Stugs only have 1,000 meter range, and where you don't want to pay the extra price for a Firefly, the Achilles does the job. So the Firefly has extra armor both on the side, rear and front. It's slightly slower and only has a 30 cal, whereas the Achilles has a 50 cal and it has the same main gun and a little bit less armor, but is faster. So for 170 points, this to me is kind of a no-brainer in comparison to bringing in a Firefly. So in Phase C, I will buy my Achilles before I buy my Fireflies normally, but that's only when they're available, Phase C, and that's why I don't bring in so many of them, because I don't feel like I would buy enough of them by the end of the game. And I also want to take up those slots with the 17 pounders, of course. So that's my anti-tank tab. Let's move on to anti-air. The anti-air is pretty simple in this one. These Crusader AA Mark IIs are just straight up OP. The Crusader AA Mark 1s are reasonable, but the Crusader AA Mark IIs are just so much better. And I mean, it's pretty obvious as to why. If you look at the main gun on the Crusader AA Mark II, 810 rounds per minute with 11 HE power. Crusader AA, 92 rounds per minute and 10 HE power. So you get more HE power and 712 more rate of fire, which is crazy. So I've got a card of these in Phase A and a card of them in Phase B. And what is so good about these guys as well is they are great ground support units. They will tear apart infantry, and you can use them just for that role, and I would recommend to do so. The thing that I'm kind of thinking about with this deck is actually bringing in another card in Phase B so I have more of them, because I do find I use them so often. But since I have multiple cards of Cromwell 6s, they normally do the job. So having only 6 cards of Crusader AA Mark IIs is ideal for me, and I use them more for like anti-air than ground support, but we'll use them as ground support when I need to. Like if I brought in a lot of these to counter anti-air, I will still use them for fire support. But you just got to be careful that you don't lose too many of them and then leave you exposed to the air. That's the main issue. It's just play that balancing act and you should be okay. Let's look at the artillery tab. So my artillery tab is tiny. You get pretty much no off-map artillery on this battle group, apart from the Cromwell 4 OP here, which has 140mm off-map, and it's not good. It's just really bad. So waiting Phase C for 120 point 140mm off-map artillery, to me it's just not worth it. So I've got a 25 pounder in phase A, mainly just to provide me with smoke cover wherever needed. And 2,400 meter range also allows it to counter battery mortars if they're an issue. And then I have a card of sextons in phase B. I don't bring in any mortars just because these 2-inch carriers only have 700 meter range, and I find them just incredibly underwhelming throughout the game. So that's pretty much my artillery tab. Not really much point in bringing in 3-inch mortars in phase B. Maybe more 25 pounders in phase B instead of 25 pounders in phase A if you find you don't use the 25 pounder in phase A. But I'd recommend maybe saving a couple ticks to bring in one of these in phase A just to sort of provide you with that smoke and artillery support early on. Then if we move into the air tab, this is a pretty simple decision for me in that I bring in Tempests in phase B and Tempests in phase C, and then Typhoon AT in phase C as well. So if we just talk through all of the units, Ulster, Recon, useless. Spitfire Mark 9s. These guys have the potential to be okay, but the main issue I find with these is they just don't have enough availability to find a place in this deck. So having a plane to shoot down an enemy plane in phase A is useful, but if I lose a Spitfire Mark 9 in phase A, I'm literally going to be crying, because this deck needs to hold back enemy air support at all costs, because your tanks die so easily to tank busters like HS-129s and the Ju-87Gs with the big old 37mm autocannons on them. So yeah, you want to have that air superiority, and that can only really come about when you have enough planes to do so. So I don't bring in Spitfires in phase A because they are Spitfire bombers, and they don't have the agility to keep themselves alive, nor the speed. So they're pretty damn awful Spitfires in the grand scheme of things. However, as soon as you move to phase B, you do get your hands on Tempests, which have 675 km/h speed, much better than 475 km/h speed, and 8 HE cannons can definitely take down those pesky enemy units for you. Use them in conjunction with your Crusader AA vehicles, and you'll be shooting down plenty of planes in no time. Typhoon bombers, just don't have a place for them on the deck because there's not enough space for another card, and Typhoon ATs in phase B aren't worth having again. You only get one, and it's not worth using a pack up just for those. Moving into phase C, however, more Tempests. This time they are 1-star availability, well, 1-star experience with 2 availability on a pack. Focusing on fighters in this deck is ideal, just to hold the skies for as long as you can. If you've lost your phase B Tempests, you can bring in phase C Tempests, and if you've still got your phase B Tempests, then you're just going to be able to control the skies for the rest of the game, so that's fine. You can also get rocket Tempests with the 20 HE power, but I prefer to bring in the Typhoon ATs, and the main difference between the Tempest and the Typhoon AT is the accuracy on the rockets. So the Typhoon AT is just generally more effective at blowing up armor in the side or rear, and that's why I bring these guys in. The only other option is Typhoon ATs with extra experience, but yeah, not really much point in my opinion. So that's it. That's all of the units in my battle group. Let's just talk about how I would play out the deck to begin with. I find that the deck sort of relies a lot on Recon to use its fire support effectively. So at the start of like phase A, I would generally bring out like 2, maybe even 3 squads of scouts alongside rifles to hold the ground where I need to, like buildings that I don't want the opponents to get into. Then what I'm going to be doing is bringing up my Cromwell 6s, probably with the Cromwell 4, throughout the first few ticks basically. So I'll bring in 1 Cromwell 6 at the start of the game most likely, and I'll use that to clear enemy AT positions from range, or just clean up enemy infantry. And then what I'll do is choose whether or not I need to either back up that Cromwell, bring in more rifles, or create sort of ambushing positions with 6-pounders. So it basically depends what you bump into. If you're bumping into sort of tanks like, I don't know, the 21st Panzer, for example, you're bumping into Samurs. Bring in Cromwells because they will beat them every time. And so you'll focus on bringing in a Cromwell 5 with a Cromwell 4 instead of bringing in another Cromwell 6. However, if you're being hit hard by infantry and you have the Recon to spot them, then use the Cromwell 6s, bring in a second one alongside a Cromwell 4, for example. And that's pretty much your like phase A. You want to be juggling that. Maybe you're bringing in your Crusader AAs as well. They're really good for stopping airstrikes early on if you're being hit by phase A German airstrikes, but that generally doesn't happen. So you would just use the Crusader AAs to hit the ground forces anyway. But you've got plenty of rifles to use, so use them. And really sort of solidify your infantry in phase A. You won't actually be bringing out many tanks. Maximum 3 tanks in phase A I would recommend. Yes, you have availability of 5 in phase A, but yeah, only bring a maximum of 3 and spend the rest of the points on rifles and maybe even the AEC Mark III if you can find the points, or maybe the 25-pounder as well. 25-pounder is pretty important actually, so don't try and miss out on that, because these extra smoke support and long-range artillery is really useful for counter-battery and also just in general smoking your units and making sure they're safe. Moving into phase B, this is where you can start to like use a bit more momentum, bring in some more AEC Mark IIIs, bring in some Sherman 5s, and really start to make back that ground. Bring in your Crusader AAs, start making tank traps with your 17-pounders, and then bring in like the Firefly if you're going to be dealing with mid-range armor on the German sides. If they're using Panthers, forget about your tanks. Bring in AT guns. That's how you deal with them. Those sods, just use them if you want to. You can swap them out if you want, honestly. I wouldn't recommend necessarily bringing them in normally. You can definitely get a card of something better. But yeah, Crusader AA Mark IIs, they really come into life in phase B, because you can cover the skies with the Crusader AAs, and then you can bring in your Tempests to shoot down enemy aircraft. And that's a really, really potent combo. Into phase C, again, you're relying on your 17-pounders and your Cromwell 6s to make you your ground. So, yeah. Use your Fireflies if you're up against like a 17th SS Panzergrenadier where you've got loads of Stugs. That's fine, use Fireflies. If not, then use Cromwell 6s and 17-pounder AT support. And that's why the deck's so odd, because it doesn't actually rely on its tanks to win the game. But either way, that is how I play the Guards Armoured. Let me know, guys, how you play the deck. Let me know your suggestions, your variations on the battle group. But in the meantime, that's all. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.